And good afternoon. Monday afternoon, 1 o'clock. Welcome to the Deal Doctor live stream. Today we're going to talk a little bit about waiving inspections. And I know there are a lot of agents out there who are waiving inspections in order to sweeten their deal for the seller. We get the question all the time, can we do that? What are the ramifications of that, and so on. And then we get the call that says, for example, I said buyer waives inspections, and but my buyers want to go back in and at least have the inspections performed for their own information. And the answer to that is that's not what you said in the purchase agreement. The seller doesn't have any obligation to let you into the house to do inspections for the purposes of your information. You waived inspections. That means that's gone. On the flip side, the same thing happens. Listing agents accept an offer where they have waived inspections, where the buyer has waived inspections, and they get a call saying, well, yeah, but we want to just do inspections for the purposes of information. Yeah, no, that's not what it says. The other questions we get, for example, are, didn't we waive all inspections? When we wrote, when the buyer wrote, buyer waives inspections, didn't they waive the inspections, plumbing, heating, electrical, structural, and termite, which is in the inspection paragraph, but didn't they also waive the investigations and whether it's zoned according to the buyer's intended use, for example? Did we waive the survey? Did we waive the some well and septic inspection? What about the title work? Did we waive everything in there? Well, I think the argument could be made. If I were a lawyer, I could make an argument that said, you waived everything. You said buyer waives inspections, period, end of story. So that may not have been what was intended, but that's what was written. And that's what was written will supersede what was intended virtually every time. So we went through a couple of possible scenarios, and I want to read them to you. And I need to ask you that you will refer to your own purchase agreements so that you can see how these fit in. But for this example, I'll use the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement. In this particular clause, says, buyer hereby waives the right to perform inspections listed in paragraph 15, that's the inspections paragraph, of the purchase agreement, including but not limited to roof, structural, heating, cooling, electrical, plumbing, radon, and accepts property as is as it pertains to paragraph inspection 15 inspections only. Buyer retains all rights stipulated in paragraph 14 regarding well, septic, and water quality inspections. Buyer retains all rights stipulated in the contract regarding survey, paragraph 18, and title insurance, paragraph 17, and financing contingency, paragraph 8, for example. So, I know that's kind of long, but it's very specific. It says this is what we are waiving, and we are accepting the property as is. We're not going to have inspections, and we're accepting it as is. So that's one option. Another option where they may have the inspections, buyer retains rights stipulated in paragraph 15 of the purchase agreement to have inspections performed for information purposes only, but waives the right to terminate or make a proposal to the seller as a result of the inspection contingency in paragraph 15 and accepts property as is. All other inspections and contingencies in this purchase agreement remain unchanged. So, for example, in that clause, it says that the septic is still going to be a consideration within the purchase agreement, and the purchase agreement is still subject to the well and septic inspection, the survey, the title work, and so on. Here's another one. Buyer waives the right to terminate contract based on any and all inspections, but not limited to structural, roof, heating, cooling, plumbing, and so on. Buyer accepts property as is. Buyer may, checkbox, or may not, have access to perform inspections for informational purposes only. So in that case, they're accepting the property as is, but they're not doing it, and they're leaving it open to have inspections performed for their information so that they know what's wrong. And I would also add, buyer or purchase agreement remains subject to any and all municipality and mortgage lending requirements. So the question came up, well, what happens if we waive inspections and then the mortgage lender says, well, this has to be fixed in order to get mortgage approval? There's a bad roof, for example. Who pays for it? Well, does the buyer pay for it just because they've waived inspections? Have they, in fact, accepted the property as is? That's okay, but it's still subject to the mortgage being approved, isn't it? So now the lender becomes a player in part of this whole picture, and the lender says, well, this roof has to be replaced before we can grant the mortgage. Now you're back at the negotiating table, even though the buyer initially accepted the house as is. Now it's a mortgage issue if you have stipulated that you are waiving the inspections that are in paragraph 15. Now we're dealing with a different paragraph within the purchase agreement. So, being the studious type that he is, Eric Graham, our other deal doctor, took that and he created this document, which we're still working on. We're trying to fine-tune it. We hope to have it to you within a week and available to you. But it's going to be a lot like the document that we shared, the five-star real estate pre-offer addendum, which goes through all of the reasons to have various things done or part of the purchase agreement, and the buyer acknowledges that they either do or don't want them, but at least they understand why these things are important. So this is, for now, titled the As-Is Language Waiver. The following inspection waiver addendum has been created to help agents and clients understand the consequences of waiving inspections and or accepting a home as is. Then you put the property address in it, and then it goes through and explains what an as-is clause means, and that it has been held up in courts, that it has been supported in courts. And so that's just a general overview about the buyer or seller have been informed about this as-is clause and what inspections are going to be performed, what the consequences of those inspections might be, and that they are enforceable in a court of law if everyone is fully aware of what the consequences are from the very beginning and have actually signed that. That's pretty cool. So kudos to Eric on that one. But there's also, Eric also took what I had written and added more, addendum for inspections being waived. And we made it into he made it into a checkbox format. For example, section 1, no inspections being waived by buyer, check those that apply. Buyer agrees that if buyer fails to conduct any inspections waived, buyer will not nonetheless be deemed to have have knowledge of any defects in the condition of the property which would have been discovered if inspections had been conducted. Buyer also agrees to accept home in its current as-is condition pertaining to those inspections being waived. And then here it says, is it the home inspection, radon, pest inspection, wood destroying insects, well and water, septic, survey? Check all of those, or do you check some of them? Well, that's really up to the buyer. Do they really feel, for example, that they want to waive all of the inspections except the radon inspection, for example? They want to know whether or not the house has a high level of radon. They could, for example, mark everything as waived except for that one inspection. Then there's section 2, inspections for informational purposes only, performed by buyer. This does not allow the buyer to terminate the purchase agreement based on the outcomes of the inspections. And then it goes on and talks about the buyer has elected to have inspections with full rights of the stated contingency, but will not ask for repairs or price reductions. So this is basically a pass-fail addendum. This section says, yeah, you can have inspections and you can still, no, I apologize, I misread that. Does not allow the buyer to terminate. So it basically says it's as is, but they can still have informational inspections performed. Repairs for inspections required by an appraiser or lender. In some cases, an appraiser or lender is going to require that you bring forward, for example, a roof inspection or a furnace inspection or an electrical inspection if the appraiser finds something in particular that is not operating the way it should. It appears off. Let me just look at this for a moment. Okay, so those are a couple of, well, several waivers of inspections that a buyer can ask for and what the outcome is. Are they accepting it as is, or are they retaining the right to terminate the contract or submit a proposal to the contract? Again, in some cases, the purchase agreements that you're using may allow the seller, for example, to terminate if a proposal regarding inspections is submitted by the buyer, and in other purchase agreements that you're using, it will not. So you need to be familiar with your purchase agreements as it regards inspections and what the possible consequences are. Do we have any questions? No. Okay. That's really kind of the biggie that I wanted to cover today. If there are other questions, please comment on it right now, or we're going to make this a short one. Let me just verify that we have all of our agents on here. Okay, so we also get questions about EMD. We're still getting questions about why there are 2 forms required to get an EMD released. And I will go through it again. We are governed not only by the contract, the purchase agreement, but we are also governed by escrow law under the Occupational Code in Michigan. We have to remain a neutral party as it regards earnest money deposits. We cannot take sides. Some agents will come to us and say, well, you can release that money. You have the right to release that money. The purchase agreement says right there, if the inspections don't pass, you get the buyer gets the earnest money back. That gives you the right, 5-star, to release the funds. No, it doesn't. Because escrow law supersedes the purchase agreement language. So what we recommend, and it is important to understand why, but what we recommend is a two-form approach. An addendum terminating the contract. Let's say it's for inspections. Buyer hereby terminates contract based on inspections. Short, simple, brief sentence. That's all you have to say. Unilaterally, the purchase agreement itself unilaterally gives the right for the buyer to, I should say then, terminate the contract. So the seller doesn't have a right to say no. However, if you turn over a mutual release, because they have identify who's going to get the earnest deposit, it requires everyone's signature. Well, if that goes past the 10-day period for inspections, or the 15-day period, or the 5-day period, or whatever it might be, now you've got an issue of whether or not that contract was still in force after the inspection period ran out. With the addendum being sent first, it gives the buyer the unilateral right to terminate the contract. That part is done, period. Now the mutual release is a matter of determining who gets the money. That's why the two-form approach is the best practice, and one that we really strongly encourage. I can't begin to count the number of cases where we would have, it would have been much simpler if the agent had sent over the addendum regarding inspections, terminating the contract, and then the mutual release, rather than simply send over the mutual release. So the two-form is very important. Anything else? Nothing else. Okay. Well, I think we'll make a short one because I think there's a lot of information. We're going to be working on this inspection waiver form that Eric and I worked on. Eric probably more than I. But I think it's going to be really helpful for agents to be able to check the boxes and say to the clients, here's what you are waiving. Here's the consequence of what you are waiving. Do you agree to that or not before we put this in the purchase agreement, or we can actually attach this to the purchase agreement as an integral part of the purchase agreement. So it's going to make it a lot simpler, I think, for agents to say, what part of this do you want to utilize? So hope that's helpful, and I'll see you next week.